Good evening everyone, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. My name is Andrew Johnson, and I'm filling in for Ralph Winterhout just for this week. Ralph will be back next week, and in a few minutes time I shall be bringing on my guest, or indeed maybe I'm her guest, and that will be Dr. Judy Wood. And we've got a few things to talk about tonight, and we're going to try and get some questions at the end that have been sent to us. And I'd like to thank Ralph for giving us this opportunity to fill in for him. And today's it's the 2nd of February 2014 when we're recording this and broadcasting this. So what I want to really start off with is a piece of text that I came across earlier this week, which fits in very well with something that's been happening in the last couple of weeks, which we're going to go into some detail to talk about. It'll probably take us quite a bit of time to explain it, and it's to do with 9/11, and it's also to do with the connection between 9/11 and energy. That's what we're going to be talking about a little bit later. But really, to lead into that, I wanted to read this text, and I've actually only changed 2 words in this, because it wasn't originally about what the word that I've changed, but I'm going to read it now, which will take us probably into the first ad break. The major purpose of this section is not to present evidence of anything, but to show that evidence does not seem to matter. The answer to why it doesn't matter is embedded in an ongoing, rather deep and tangled confusion, and it will take mental equipment far more stalwart than mine to penetrate it. A considerable volume of very strange evidence exists about 9/11. That is, simply not challengeable, even if it is strange. But since evidence doesn't matter, we need not examine the entirety of the volume to make the point that it doesn't matter. The above sentence probably sounds like a babble of words, but the babble might become more understandable if the concept of information management is forced into it. Information management has to do with establishing whatever is to be conceptualized as constituting reality within any given societal framework or within any social grouping. This is to say that reality making and information management are somehow interrelated, largely because the reality cannot be constructed unless information relevant to it is managed in this or that way. The process of constructing a reality requires 3 activities, all of which require information management talents. 1. Facts, evidence and information that might support the reality, thereby proving it real, need to be emphasized and, best of all, taught as the truth. 2. Facts, evidence and information that would tend to deconstruct the reality need to be disposed of somehow. 3. The willful introduction of useful illusions if and when 1 and 2 above cannot be made to seem consistent or to be creatively managed. Anyone who can become expert in dealing with the 3 factors above will find his or her talents as a spin doctor much in demand. The term spin doctor is of rather recent vintage, of course, but the craft it represents is quite an old and traditional one. The factors briefly outlined above seem straightforward enough, especially in that the activities of spin doctors are sometimes mentioned in mainstream media. Indeed, what does a spin doctor do if not to manage information along the lines of the 3 factors outlined? Spin doctorism is usually mentioned only in relationship to political intrigues, most specifically those emerging or ongoing at the highest echelons in Washington, D.C. But the extended fact of the matter is that science, philosophy, economics and sociology are also cluttered with spin doctorism and or residues of them. It is necessary to dig a little deeper in order to achieve a more firm grasp of the meanings of the above considerations. It can be observed, at least hypothetically, that the average human being cannot function very well unless a few realities are established, and which thereafter arouse some semblance of certainty. Otherwise, the human sort of flops about in a sinkhole of uncertainty, and groups of humans flopping about in this way are known to be detrimental with regard to any number of situations. Indeed, information needs to be managed in order to avoid extensive demonstrations of such flopping around. This natural and perpetual need automatically calls forth the profession of spin doctorism. If human specimens were not information processing entities each in their own right, then the age-old profession of spin doctoring would not be needed. As it is, though, human specimens are information processing entities. That is so results in a variety of problems that sometimes stress the creative energies of spin doctors in no small way. But regarding this, there are sometimes two blessings that ease the job of proficient spin doctors. The first blessing is that a fair share of humans don't really require copious amounts of information as they proceed from the womb of birth to the maw of death. The second blessing is that a fair share of humans will accept illusory information, since it does take rather copious amounts of information to distinguish illusory from other kinds of information. Spin doctors since antiquity have apparently been keenly aware of these two blessings. It has long been understood that illusory information can serve quite excellent purposes, since in large part there is no professed desire among the human masses for other kinds of information. To this must be added one other significant factor that not only eases the job of spin doctors, but elevates it to a kind of power threshold. In that each human is an information processing entity, each is also an information processing mechanism. The latter here is not mentioned in order to diminish in any way the former. The point is that information is composed of very numerous data bytes, the whole of which need to be organized into some kind of information whole, so one fact in itself tends to have little meaning unless it is compared to and combined with lots of other facts. In this sense, then, one fact, or even 10 of them, only adds up to a very tiny information universe. Beyond this, it is quite well understood that the human species, universally and generically, shares in mental equipment which processes information in what amounts to mechanistic ways. Perhaps this can better be understood by picturing the generic mental equipment as the computer hardware, and then picturing the information, real, artificial or illusory, entered into it as mental software programs. This is to say, as those computer efficient realise that information that conflicts is mechanically rejected, while information that agrees is mechanically accepted. All the complexities of human mental apparatus considered, this analogy may be a weak one, to be sure, but this situation is, of course, an additional blessing for information spinning experts, or at least for proficient ones. All that really needs to be done in order to maintain spin control of mental software program is 1. On the one hand, to enter and maintain certain data or information factoids considered desirable, and 2. On the other hand, to delete and maintain as deleted certain other data information factoids considered undesirable. Lastly, all human entities seem to possess what might be referred to as an information comfort zone. Furthermore, most humans seem to like this zone, and they don't particularly want information discomfort to be induced or intruded into it. Thus, old and familiar information associated with information comfort is desirable over new, unfamiliar and alien information that induces discomfort. Thus it is easy enough to see why information might entirely wreck information comfort zones is viewed with ultimate distaste. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. My name's Andrew Johnson and we're filling in for Ralph Winterode, and we'll just be here for this week, and Ralph will be back next week. We're going to take callers in the next hour, and the number to call will be 1800 313 9443. Now, the text that I just read, quite long, has some quite complicated constructs within it, but that's actually from a book by a chap called Ingo Swann, and he didn't write the book about 9/11, he wrote it about something else, but the book is called Penetration, and you can go and check that out, and that came from chapter 12. That was the first part of chapter 12, and essentially what I was using it to illustrate was this idea of how you can manage people's perceptions, how you can manage the information that they're exposed to, and therefore by doing that you can construct the reality that they experience and the reality that they live in. And so I'd like now to bring on Dr. Judy Wood, if she's still there.
Yes, hello, I'm here.
Hi. And so we've been talking quite a bit about really what perception management, and what it was called there was spin doctorism, and particularly as it's been applied to, you know, how your research has actually been perception managed, probably more than certainly anything else I've encountered. You know, have you got any comments on that text that I've read out, because we did discuss it earlier on?
When you first sent it to me, you said you changed some words, and I thought you just changed the words NINEELE, you know, the spelled out version of 9/11 to the numbers 9/11.
Right.
It was spot on.
It's applicable to such a lot of what we've been dealing with that when I read it, you know, I felt quite a strong urge to send it to you. And we're going to explore some of this, particularly in relation to 9/11, and we're going to talk about somebody called Dr. or Professor Stephen E. Jones. I just prefer to call him Stephen E. Jones, which I think for reasons which may become clearer as we go through some of this. And I think we probably mentioned this when we were last on, at least in part, a few weeks ago. And well, basically, I'm going to play quite a long clip now, which is about 6 minutes long, and you will find out that Stephen E. Jones was actually involved in the research of something called cold fusion, which is an energy phenomenon which was basically discovered. Well, that was actually discovered quite a long time ago, but became more known about in the late 80s because of two chemists called Pons and Fleischmann, and also Stephen E. Jones was involved with this. But we're going to first play a clip about Stephen E. Jones's research into 9/11, which revolves around something called thermite, and that's essentially how I sort of got involved in the story. And I'm going to play this clip, and then we'll try and explain it when we come back. But this goes on for about 6 minutes, so you're going to hear quite a lot of things in this clip, which we'll try and discuss when we come back.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Do you want to say something before I play?
I was thinking of you know, the order of things. That I was thinking of reading that Eric Larson quote.
Okay. Do you want to read that first? Have you got that there?
Yes.
Or shall I?
Yep. It's right here.
Okay.
The scientific method, as it came into being during the Enlightenment period, is a method known as empiricism, or as the empirical method. Under the terms of empiricism, all conclusions are, must, and can be drawn from the observable evidence, and from observable evidence only. Evidence must precede any and every conclusion to be drawn from it. Then, if sound logic governs in the relationship between evidence and the conclusions drawn from it, that conclusion will be irrefutable. That's a quote by Eric Larson.
Right.
And think about that.
Yeah. Is that in your foreword? Is that correct? Or?
No, that's in an article he has on Intrepid Report.
Okay. Well, people can go and read Eric Larson's article, which, you know, offers some deeper thoughts on some of what the topics that we're speaking about. So I'm going to go ahead and play this clip there's multiple clips of Stephen E. Jones from various times, and there's a little beep in between each clip.
First off, will you, just for the listeners that don't know who you are, give us your background, some of the publications you've written for, some of the research you've done?
Sure. Well, let's go back to graduate school. I was a graduate student in physics, got my PhD from Vanderbilt. Did most of my research, though, at the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center, and finished up my coursework at Stanford since I was out there doing the research. What else? And then I did postdoctoral work at Cornell and Los Alamos National Lab. So, I've been around the block a few times. I have a publication in Scientific American with a dear friend of mine, Johann Roselsky. That was back in 1987, July. You want to look that up? The title of our article is Cold Nuclear Fusion. Yes, that's correct. We're talking there about muon catalyzed fusion. It was just a lot of fun. For a number of years, I was the principal investigator for the Department of Energy on this study of muon catalyzed fusion.
Amazing. So you've headed up investigations for the government before.
Yeah.
And now
Department of Energy funded our research. That's right. Well, there are a few of us now, physicists, that have come out and studied and written and talked about 9/11 as an inside job based on evidence. And so I wrote back to them and said I would be glad to appear, and I named 2 other physicists who I trust now who could also appear.
And tell folks the names of those individuals.
You bet. The other physicists, and both of these have written in the Journal of 911studies.com, so I'll put a plug in for that journal because it represents solid research. And these are Professor David Griscom, Griscom. He's a fellow of the American Physical Society. I was so pleased to see his...
We're not going to find the Marvin Martian proponents over there.
No, you won't. David Griscom.
Dear.
And the other one, it took a while for the group to trace down this video evidence. This is an amateur videographer, a couple of them actually, showing and capturing this event, this very anomalous activity, this molten metal flowing out of the building. As soon as I saw it, I knew it was not aluminum because I had worked with molten aluminum before. And molten liquid aluminum has the property that it's silvery, but rather like aluminum foil, at all temperatures in daylight conditions. Yeah, it's kind of disturbing. I hate to see it, too. It's in the movement, but if we can just get together and say, okay, we're going to sort through some of this. Let's not let the weaker evidence hold us back. We're going to put that off. We've written up articles about it now and explained why we're not going to keep being distracted by the no planes hitting the towers idea or the space beams, the beams from space. We've written papers about that now, so let's put them aside because let's focus on what's going to get us to the goal of justice here and peace.
Now, these fellows, people, not just men, but people that promote the no planes theory also have the characteristic that they will vehemently and personally attack those who challenge the no planes theory. I've run into that, and early on, actually, and I can name them. I think you may know the names. Unfortunately, Professor who lost her job has joined this group and gone in with those methods, and it's just regrettable. I think really we need more unity and to agree on the important areas where the evidences are very strong. Dr. Wood.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. My name's Andrew Johnson. I'm filling in for Ralph Winterow just for this week. Ralph will be back next week. I have with me Dr. Judy Wood. We'll take callers in the next hour. The number is 1-800-313-9443. We are talking about information management, spin doctorism and reality management in relation to Dr. Judy Wood's research into 9/11, and I've just been playing some clips of Stephen E. Jones, a professor formerly of Brigham Young University, and I've just got to finish off playing this remainder of this clip, and then we will discuss what he was saying.
First off, will you, just for the listeners that don't know who you are, give us your background, some of the publications you've written for,
Sure.
some of the research you've done?
Sure. Well, let's go back to...
First off, will you, just for the listeners that don't know...
Okay, well that's actually restarted that clip, so I might try and go back to that another time after the next break when I've managed to get to it. But basically what we heard just before the break was that Stephen E. Jones was actually trying to basically give himself, he was laying out his credentials, and within his credentials and his experience, you will have heard him say that he worked for Los Alamos National Laboratories and headed up investigations for the government. Well, actually, Alex Jones said that, and Stephen E. Jones agreed. He then started talking about molten metal in relation to the destruction of the World Trade Center, which has been commonly repeated. So the theme that I wanted to bring out with that clip is that he was actually trying to implant certain information to create an illusion. He also mentioned this idea of space beams, and that was actually the next clip I wanted to play, which I'll try and get to. And he actually mentioned how space beams were involved or weren't involved. Now, this is where we come to Dr. Judy Wood, because it was actually him, although she wasn't named in that clip. It was actually that research that he was talking about, Dr. Judy Wood's research. And so I don't know if you've got any comments on that so far.
Yes, and he also had mentioned about, I think, the aluminum is silvery. Did he mention that one in there? That was the first time I contacted him, was about that, saying, I didn't care what he was trying to argue, but that line of argument was fallacious. That he said aluminum is silvery at all temperatures in daylight conditions. Well, aluminum glows. I would evaporate it in my lab on a daily basis. I know it glows. I couldn't find any pictures on the web at the time, so I took pictures of it in my lab and sent it to him. And he replied back, well, maybe it glows in Clemson, South Carolina, but it doesn't glow in Provo, Utah.
Right. So it was obviously very important to him to actually try and proceed with the creation of that illusion. And this is,
against high school physics.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that is clearly incorrect, yet he needed that to convince people of this idea of heat in the destruction of the World Trade Center and in the aftermath of the destruction. And we still have questions about that. We still have questions about the heat and the molten metal and the remains and all of this. And the evidence, when you look at it in Dr. Wood's book, the evidence that she submitted in a court case, it's just not there. So we see an example of Stephen E. Jones being directly employed in creating an illusion in this spin doctorism in relation to 9/11 and specifically Dr. Judy Wood's research. So that's one of the points I wanted to bring out, and we'll try and get to that other clip. I was hoping that it would replay from where I left off, but it didn't, unfortunately.
And also bringing this up to his attention, and I kept at it to the point that me and my student, had taken pictures of it and sent it to him. And I wasn't backing down, and so I was a problem.
Yes, so because you were a threat to the creation of his illusion at that time, other action had to be taken, and that is still ongoing. That action is still ongoing to this day, which we're going to get to, because. But it's worth pointing out as well that Jones talked a lot about thermite and molten metal, and yet when he made this request for correction, as it's called, which we talked about a bit in the last programme a couple of weeks ago, where he made a formal challenge to NIST with a group of other people in 2007, and that was 3 weeks after you'd formulated your initial request for correction, wasn't it, I understand?
Right, I submitted mine March 16th. 2007. Right. Theirs was sometime in April 2007.
Yeah, and I mean, if you go and look at Dr. Wood's RFC on her website, which is drjudywood.com, you will see all the reference to her research, which is into the energy effects seen at the World Trade Center in the destruction and in the aftermath. But in Stephen E. Jones's RFC, you won't find any reference to his research on thermite that he's claimed was conclusive. That's not in his RFC. So this, again, clearly can be seen that he was attempting to create an illusion, and you can't put an illusory case into a legal document or a legal basis for legal action. That in itself is illegal.
I think we pointed out that there's, I think you originally pointed this out, there was 3 reasons that we could think of why it wouldn't be submitted. Number 1, they didn't think it was important. Number 2, it's a federal crime to defraud the government. And number 3, it's treason if done so by an employee of the government to another government agency, because that's the government attacking itself.
Right.
I can't think of another reason, can you?
Well, not really, because if they were so convinced and had been going around doing all these presentations with that evidence, they had the one in Chicago that our friend Russ went to, why aren't they putting that into a legal framework? Surely they're happy with it. And so I keep explaining this to people, but I'm hoping that it's getting through, and there are some signs that it might actually be getting through. But one of the other things that he did, and we'll try and play this clip if I can get to it during the break, is he also said that you talked about ray beams from space and space beams and so on, which of course is not true. I don't know if you'd like to comment on that at all.
Right, I've never stated that. I've never said anything like that. Initially, from the very beginning, it was like, let's look at the evidence. I started out with the billiard ball example, and then I started looking at the evidence. I have all this evidence of dust, all this evidence of, toasted cars, holes. It was all about evidence, but it was evidence of some kind of energy effect. You can eliminate that through the seismic chart. That eliminates kinetic energy being the mechanism of destruction. Also, because of the evidence of lack of high heat, you can eliminate the explanation of some kind of thermal energy weapon as the mechanism of destruction. So that right there eliminates laser beams from space, because the buildings were not cooked to death, nor were they beaten to death. And now these are categories, very broad categories. And another category is directed energy. Now within each of these categories, there's specifics, like laser beams can be considered a directed energy weapon, but it's also would be acting as a thermal energy weapon in its mechanism. Now, if you say, okay, it couldn't be a pea shooter, that's a kinetic energy weapon, so therefore it can't be any other kinetic energy weapon, that's kind of silly. It's like saying, well, it can't be a missile because a pea shooter couldn't have done it, and those are both kinetic energy weapons. Jones seemed to have been doing the same kind of thing as saying it couldn't be a laser beam from space, so therefore it can't be any type of directed energy. And that's
right.
I've never been specific as to what it was.
No, I mean, I think that the original paper that you posted, there was I think they picked on the title, didn't they, which wasn't even chosen by you, suggested by somebody else.
Well, actually, the reason why I used, but I used also that title, and it's actually stated in an early interview with Jim Fetzer that it was to get attention so that it would keep me safe. It would be out there and get attention.
Right.
But it's like people were saying that energy weapons don't exist. Well, then what do you think the Star Wars program was created for if energy weapons don't exist?
Well, that's right, and I think it's very important that I think you'd obviously realised by then that what you'd seen in the evidence wasn't like anything else that you knew about. It wasn't something that was in the public eye at all. It was something which you didn't know what it was at that time. You just knew, as you said, it knew what didn't fit any of the categories. That it wasn't bombs, it wasn't laser beams, it wasn't anything like that.
I'm not even saying that the U.S. government did it, but I'm saying that those who study energy weapons probably have a lot better idea than I do. Why don't you go ask them?
And that's another thing that Jones said in one of those clips. He talked about an inside job, which we don't think it was that necessarily.
Exactly.
And we'll come back after the break and join us after the break for more discussion. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. My name is Andrew Johnson, and I'm filling in for Ralph Winterode. And Ralph will be back next week. And I have with me Dr. Judy Wood. We'll take calls in the next hour. And the number to call is 1-800-313-9443. And we're talking about 9/11 and the information management going on relating to Dr. Judy Wood's research. And I started earlier on to play a clip of Stephen E. Jones, professor from Brigham Young University, and how he was trying to characterise Dr. Wood's research. And I'm going to resume playing the clip in a moment, but I think Dr. Wood wanted to add something that she wanted to say before the break about the weapon which was used to destroy the World Trade Center.
Right. Many folks criticize me and say, well, you need to name what the weapon was. No, I don't. I just know what I know that I know. I know what I can prove, and I don't go beyond that. I only go to where the evidence shows, and the evidence shows that you can rule out kinetic energy, you can rule out thermal energy, but you cannot rule out directed energy. And right. I don't need to name the serial numbers or what the operator had for breakfast and so forth, because we know that such a weapon exists because it happened.
I say to people that, we know the general nature of the weapon, but we don't know who owns it. We don't, as you say, we don't have the serial numbers. We don't really know where it was particularly. So, that's the way it is, because that's the only evidence that we've got.
We do know what evidence it produces because that evidence got produced.
Right, so I'm going to resume and play this clip from Jones.
People that promote the no planes theory also have the characteristic that they will vehemently and personally attack those who challenge the no planes theory. I've run into that, and early on actually, and I can name them. I think you may know the names. Unfortunately, professor who lost her job has joined this group and gone in with those methods, and it's just regrettable. I think really we need more unity and to agree on the important areas where the evidences are very strong. Dr. Wood says maybe there's a beam of laser or microwave from space or something that came down, and she says instead of thermites. Well, I'm saying, look, there's a lot of evidence for thermite. And on the other hand, some exotic laser or maser beam, I'm one that's open to suggestion, but boy, there better be some pretty good evidence, And I haven't, it looks to me like the thermite explanation fits the data quite well, and so that's where I stand on that. But plus the fact that it takes a lot of energy. If you're sending a beam of laser from space, you've got to have an enormous energy source in space to do that. And that's been looked at. It's tough. It's a tough problem. It's almost ruled out there. I don't think we have such a weapon. Thank goodness. I do have one quickie, though, on that. She also talks at her side about, look, the calculations need to be done more. But the other thing is the cars, which I talked about, those look very much like thermite for the reasons I explained. She says that's a laser beam hitting things, or a maser. But no, that would not account for the pockmarks in the plastic and the corrosion in the steel like thermite does. So really I think that already the thermite explanation is much better. Plus, she needs an energy source for her high energy weapon and some place where it exists. I'm sorry, we need more data.
Super thermite in the nanocomposite, the sol gel form, can be painted onto steel columns, and that then can be touched off with radio-controlled signals. This would not take months.
How long, Professor, how long would it take to put enough thermite into a building like that to be able to bring it down?
In my first paper, I estimate that it depends, of course, on the number of men. You tell them this is where you go. They might not even know what they're painting on to the columns. They have access through the elevator shafts in the towers. That's where you need to plant the explosives, primarily to bring the...
Okay, interesting. John Brown,
so
are you open
the
to...
answer then is it would take a week.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are listening in the world. My name is Andrew Johnson, and I'm filling in for Ralph Winterow just for this week. Ralph will be back next week. We've got quite a bit to get through. We're going to try and take some callers maybe towards the end of the hour if we get time. And the number is 1-800-313-9443. We're talking about 9/11, and cold fusion was going to come up as well shortly, because we're talking about a physicist, Stephen E. Jones, and how he's involved in creating illusions and managing the perception of information about Dr. Judy Wood's research into the destruction of the World Trade Center. And you can read about that research either at drjudywood.com, or you can get a copy of her book, Where Did the Towers Go? And that's from wheredidthetowers go.com. And I have a website called checktheevidence.com, where you can read about how I've written up the way in which the perception management of 9/11 has been going on since, well, the day it happened really, but I've been documenting it since 2007, so it's almost 7 years ago that I started writing about this now, if not slightly longer. So we were talking about some correspondence I'd received from Caroline Louise, an English person, and I sent her links to my documentation, which is called 9/11 Finding the Truth, which documents what Dr. Wood and I have been talking about. But she didn't seem to engage with this evidence. For example, she claimed that she couldn't find Dr. Wood's email address to write and ask her about these matters, yet her email address is shown in the top right-hand corner of the homepage of Dr. Judy Wood's website. She's very easy to contact by email, but she does get a lot of email. This Caroline Louise person also claimed that she had pretty much read everything on Dr. Wood's website, and she specifically asked me about alleged threats made by Jim Fetzer and Stephen E. Jones at different times. And I've written about the threat by Jim Fetzer, but I haven't really written up about what Jones has said in this regard, and we may cover that later, but some of that is on Dr. Wood's website. She also, and why I'm talking about cold fusion, is she queried me about a timeline I had posted on my website, which shows the activities of Stephen E. Jones, Crockett Grab, and a couple of other figures in relation to cold fusion research and 9/11 research. And she queried in this article a statement that said cold fusion was crazy or impossible. And she said that I'd sourced this to page 140 to 145 of Dr. Eugene Mallow's book, Fire from Ice. Dr. Eugene Mallow was actually an activist, I suppose you might call him, in trying to raise awareness of cold fusion, as it had become called. But what I want to play now is a couple of clips in relation to cold fusion, which features Stephen E. Jones. And the first one is Stephen E. Jones talking about his role in cold fusion. And this is a couple of minutes long.
Is it a shortcut to fusion energy? I don't want to disappoint anyone. I think I'll read my lips answer here, and then I'll carry on. I think that'll become clear why I'm saying that. Can you read my lips on that back in the back? It says no. Energy is a long way off. That's why I say no. This is our result. Just way off. It's I think a door that's open to us, but really a door on physics more than on energy. Geophysics in particular could be an interesting area.
I didn't realize that you were at the helm of this right from the beginning.
Well, at the helm of the cold fusion part of it. In fact, that was the title Paul Palmer and I gave to what we were doing, which is, we sometimes called it metal-catalyzed fusion because the fusion occurs in metals. What they found is, I think, very interesting. So as I pointed out especially to Fleischmann, I said, look, you can't call this fusion if you don't have the nuclear products commensurate, the same level, to go with your heat. And heat means a lot of fusion, if it's fusion. Well, by now, there's still a lot of workers in this field, including myself, really. But what I've said from the beginning was, it does not look like fusion. You should not call it fusion. Now, the conference next month, July, was at the University of Missouri, and I'll be there.
But the conference is titled Anomalous Heat Effects. I like that much better. Anomalous heat effects, you see. Not heat due to fusion. Okay, it doesn't say that anywhere in their conference write-up. Rather, it's anomalous. We don't know what it is. And that's what I tried to... And even Fleischmann, shortly before he passed away, rest his soul, did admit that, it was a mistake that he had made to call it fusion way back in, it was 1989. They had their press conference.
Okay, so there we heard Stephen E. Jones explaining his role in cold fusion, which is, in essence, it's an energy phenomenon. And the problem for the powers that be, the folks that are managing everything and creating our reality, is that cold fusion appears to demonstrate an effect where, under certain conditions which are still rather poorly understood, more energy can be obtained from the experimental apparatus than is put into it. In other words, at certain times, energy seems to come from nowhere, and there appear to be nuclear products which only are produced in a nuclear reaction. Now, Jones falsely stated in that clip that Martin Fleischmann, who was one of the co-discoverers of the cold fusion process, as it became called, he falsely described that Fleischmann decided that it was a bad idea to call it fusion shortly before he died. And in fact, Fleischmann, that wasn't the case. About a year after they first published their results in 1989, they thought that the idea of fusion was incorrect. They just thought it was a nuclear effect of some kind, but not necessarily fusion. And you'll hear Fleischmann quoted on that shortly. So again, Jones is creating an illusion about what's been said about the cold fusion process, and he actually contradicts himself, because he said he named the process cold fusion, but then he said that Fleischmann couldn't call it fusion, but it was actually Jones that helped to put this terminology in place, and that was also part of the information management around the whole operation, which still persists to this day, as we'll hear. And in fact, what happened to Pons and Fleischmann is, because they came up with this concept that you could get energy from nowhere, they were attacked, they were vilified, they were called all kinds of things, and you can read about that in Dr. Eugene Mallard's book, Fire from Ice. And so after about 2 or 3 years, the whole thing kind of faded away. And if I play this clip from a few years later, which is actually from a completely different area, it demonstrates, and we'll hear another demonstration of this, how well the psychological operation worked.
My name is Laurent Bouzereau, and I am producing the Back to the Future DVD in collaboration with Universal Studios Home Video. One of the end sequences with Doc in the car uses fusion. It is a contemporary concept now, but how did you know about it then?
Fuel cells. Yeah, well, we knew about that. We read about that.
Fusion was something that everybody's been experimenting with, and in fact, I think about 6 or 8 months after the movie came out, it was when those scientists in Utah claimed that they had figured out cold fusion, and that was all over the news for 4 or 5 months until nobody could replicate those experiments, and turned out those guys just didn't know what they were doing. But we actually got a letter from the Defense Department when the movie came out. They wanted to know, what did we know about fusion power? Very scary, kids. Very
This is how
scary.
that's how it works.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. This is Andrew Johnson filling in for Ralph Winterode. Sorry about the gremlins. I've got some software here which doesn't want to behave itself, so apologies if I was cut off in mid-sentence or mid-word. I have with me Dr. Judy Wood, and we're filling in for Ralph Winterode just for this week, and Ralph will be back next week. And we do have a caller which we'll try and get to in a minute, and I got that clip played. Did the clip come through okay? Did you hear that, Dr. Wood, and the clip of Bob Zemeckis talking about Back to the Future?
Yes. where they talked about how Pons and Fleischmann, well, they alluded it was Pons and Fleischmann, didn't know what they were doing.
Right. And so the point that I was making is that the illusion that was created by people like Jones, it wasn't just Jones, there were a number of other people at it, which you can read about in Dr. Maller's book, was successful. They were able to hide the idea that cold fusion was real, and indeed it is real, and it appears to be related in some way, which we don't really know, to what happened to the towers. And I've got one final clip, which I'm going to try and play now, and this is a clip from a combination of clips, actually, about 2 or 3 minutes long, from a CBS 60 Minutes documentary from 2009, where they revisited cold fusion and went to see a chap called Mr. Duncan, a physicist, and also they went to see Martin Fleischmann, who was one of the people that originally discovered the phenomenon in the 1980s.
With so many open questions, we wanted to find out whether cold fusion is more than a tempest in a teapot. So we asked the American Physical Society, the top physics organization in America, to recommend an independent scientist. They gave us Rob Duncan, Vice Chancellor of Research at the University of Missouri and an expert in measuring energy.
When we first called you and said we'd like you to look into cold fusion for 60 minutes, what did you think when you hung up the phone?
I think my first reaction was something like, well, hasn't that been debunked?
We asked Duncan to go with us to Israel, where a lab called Energetics Technologies has reported some of the biggest energy gains yet.
We are delivering power into the cell.
When I got there, I just kept asking about, okay, how do you know this? How do you know that?
How do you get 30%?
Duncan spent 2 days examining cold fusion experiments.
I'm just skeptical because I'm always skeptical.
And investigating whether the measurements were accurate.
Do you measure that aluminum temperature directly or just assume it's equal to...
And when you walked out of the Israeli lab, you thought what?
I thought, wow, they've done something very interesting here.
He crunched the numbers himself and searched for an explanation other than a nuclear effect.
I found that the work done was carefully done and that the excess heat, as I see it now, is quite real.
Are you surprised to hear yourself saying this?
Very much. I never thought I'd say that. If you ask me, is this going to have any impact on our energy policy, it's impossible to say because we don't fundamentally understand the process yet. But to say that we don't fundamentally understand the process and that's why we're not going to study it is like saying I'm too sick to go to the doctor.
You know, I wonder how you feel about going public, endorsing this phenomenon on 60 Minutes, when maybe 90%, I'm guessing, of your colleagues think that it's crackpot science.
I certainly was among those 90% before I looked at the data, and I can see where they'll be very concerned when they see this piece. All I have to say is read the published results, talk to the scientists, never let anybody else do your thinking for you.
There was one more scientist we wanted to find. A man who left America in disgrace and retired with his wife to the English countryside. Martin Fleischmann. At home, he pulled out an improved version of his experiment, something that he was working on when he was hounded out of science.
When you hold that in your hand and you think back on what's happened these last 20 years, what do you think?
A wasted opportunity.
Wasted? Because it was discredited at the time.
He told us he has 2 regrets. Calling the nuclear effect fusion, a name coined by a competitor,
if you loaded the cell with heavy water,
and having that news conference, something he says the University of Utah wanted.
I wasn't able to play the clip directly in the program due to technical problems, so the discussion here is a little bit disjointed. Basically, this was the CBS 60 Minutes program that we were discussing, and you can hear in the clip that the physicist who went to investigate found out that cold fusion was indeed real, or the process which the energy release which was found by the Israeli team was real, and he was convinced of it.
I would like to insert at this point that the misnamed cold fusion was used to debunk cold fusion or to give it a bad rap. in the same way that space beams is used to derail what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about evidence. I'm not talking about any particular, serial number of any particular item. But calling it space beams, and then you refute space beams, it runs it into the ditch. Just like calling it cold fusion and proving it's not fusion runs it into the ditch. What Pons and Fleischmann discovered has been replicated, but it was the naming of it that ran into the ditch.
Right, that's exactly right. And this is what essentially he's tried to do the same thing with your research. Basically, he's tried to run it off into the ditch. And I think that we talked a little bit earlier about this Caroline Louise contacting me regarding this. I think we were talking about this, and it appears to be because you presented some of what we've been talking about at a conference in November 2012 in Holland. You included the fact that Jones had tried to manipulate people's thinking about the cold fusion phenomenon. I mean, you didn't characterize it that way. All that you did was you showed that he organized this vote at a meeting. I think that was at the American Physical Society, wasn't it? So if you want to correct me on that.
And they just, Jones raised his hand, everyone else just raised their hand, and just like that, cold fusion or, that, whatever the process was, let's not research anymore. Let's just vote against science. That was a vote. That's not how you conduct science.
Right.
And I don't want to see that happen again. That's why I'm reminding people of here's how easy it was to run into the ditch before. Let's not do that again.
And this seems to be the case with the Architects and Engineers group, that you're building up a set of voters who can vote on the truth, when in actuality, they don't explain what actually happened to the towers. They don't acknowledge that the towers turned to dust. Well, they certainly don't acknowledge that to the extent that it actually happened that way.
And a lot of people, are convinced that thermite had something to do with it. Well, you have this dust in a baggie. Explain to me what that dust has to do with what happened to the buildings, other than the fact that the buildings were turned to dust.
Exactly. So, people need to think very carefully about what's going on and the way that information is being presented to them. Going into this mysterious Caroline Louise person that wrote to me, she eventually revealed that she is somebody called Caroline Leach. And she sent me her Wikipedia page, and she's actually a British playwright and author, and she wrote a book in 1999 called In the Shadow of the Dream Child, and it's about the life of Lewis Carroll, who of course wrote Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Alice in Wonderland. And an article in the Times Literary Supplement labelled Leach and her supporters revisionists for attempting to rewrite history. That's what it says on the Wikipedia page. Now, I asked her in an email, after I'd given her some of the evidence, a little of which we've had time to cover tonight, I said to her, is it moral, just, or right to cover up the knowledge of advanced energy production technology and then turn it into some kind of weapon, which I would contend is what's happened here, and that's why we're seeing these two things being connected. And she replied, no, it isn't. But have we actually established that this is what Jones was doing? Don't we need to do that first before rushing to condemnation? Well, I've never condemned Jones. I've just pointed out what he's done. I don't actually condemn him. That's a very emotive word. I actually say that this is what he's done, and this is a result of what he's done. Things like Fukushima are the result of what he's done, not the event itself, but the aftermath of it. In other words, we could have shut down nuclear reactors years ago if this technology had been developed and not suppressed. And this person didn't really seem to want to look at the evidence. And on the Wikipedia page, it says that her book, the Caroline Louise's book, on what she terms the Carroll myth, have been major sources of upheaval and controversy in recent years, and she has produced very polarised responses from scholars and lay enthusiasts. But what she wrote to me was, at the moment I'm just trying to get a clear picture of events in relation to the cover-up of 9/11. My personal point of view is that the less we resort to polarised thinking in any situation, the better. I find it hard to think of any time in history when you're either with us or against us has produced anything positive. Well, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what happened on 9/11 and how it's being covered up. Okay, well, I've covered most of what I wanted to cover there. I'm going to try and get to play the other clip, but I'd like you to hear if we get a chance before the end. Is there anything you wanted to add to what I've just said, Dr. Wood?
Well, I could add these various ingredients that were found that I reported on in my book. It's said that, quite a few different people actually say this and repeat it and repeat it. There's no evidence to that. They say, oh, she totally ignores the dust analysis. She totally ignores the tritium values. She totally ignores, well, it's in my book. Mm. And that's what I presented at the energy conference, and that was, really got people upset.
Right, and I think this is some people are trying to create illusions, saying you don't reference the evidence. This is all part of the information management process.
And the evidence that I presented, for example, the tritium that was found, it shows that it's not at all the level that you'd find like in leaky nuclear plants, but it is along the same in the same range you would expect for something like cold fusion. Right. Or what has been termed cold fusion. Right.
And this is something that we didn't really get onto, as tritium was one of the things that came out as being one of the sort of smoking guns, if you will, of some type of nuclear process. And we were talking earlier, before we came on to the program, about John Bockris, who was one of the people that got the tritium in his experiments. So, and he's now sadly passed away. Eugene Mallove has passed away. And, we're getting to quite a few people who are gone now who originally did this research in the 80s. We've got a break coming up now, and we'll try to go to Jeff in Vermont after the break. So please come back. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. My name's Andrew Johnson from England, and I've got with me Dr. Judy Wood. We're filling in for Ralph Wintrow just for this week. And Ralph will be back next week. And we're talking about 9/11 and cold fusion and the way that the information surrounding these things has been managed. And one person in common with these two areas of research is Stephen E. Jones. And we've had Jeff on the line from Vermont on line 1, who's been waiting a while. So perhaps we can bring Jeff on and try and answer any questions he might have, or let him say what he'd like to say.
Hello?
Hi, is that
Hello,
Jeff?
Hey, Judy. Hi, everybody. I have a comment and I have a question. And my comment first is I don't know why you guys always in the 9/11 truth movement focus on how it happened and what came to make the buildings go down and everything like that. I think we should focus on who did it. I think it's very important that people focus on who did it. And if you study the 9/11 truth movement and since its conception, there's always been this certain group of people that has been behind everything. You have John Gould that had 9/11 blogger. You had Mike Berg. You had Luke Radowski, Jason Burmis. You had all these players that were trying to control how people perceived what was happening in the 9/11 truth movement.
Right. Okay. Do you have a question at all? Yeah, we're familiar with that.
Yeah,
we'll come into that in a minute.
Yeah. Then if you look at who benefited from it, Larry Silverstein's one of them.
Do you have a question?
Louder.
Do you have a question?
Okay. I guess. What is Judy Wood's perception on who was behind 9/11 and who benefited from 9/11 and all these wars that were precipitated from 9/11? I think that should be the main focus,
if you
not
could,
the buildings.
Okay, Dr. Wood, if you'd like to answer that question. Dr. Judy Wood, by the way, yes?
Yes, I'm not part of the truth movement. I'm a scientist and a researcher. I conduct research and I write reports. That's what I do. And I conducted a comprehensive forensic investigation, the only one in the public domain, about what happened on 9/11. And if you do any kind of investigation of a crime, the first thing you must do is determine what happened. Before you can determine how it happened, you have to determine what it is. And then who did it. You have to define what it is. And once I had done that, I filed my information with NIST as a request for correction, which caused me to be a whistleblower.
Right.
Qualifying as a whistleblower, I was then eligible to file a federal qui tam case, whistleblower case, which I did. And the defendants in that case were companies that were manufacturers and developers of energy weapons.
Right.
And they also had a contract with the U.S. government to know everything about any weapon of mass destruction that exists or is being developed anywhere.
Right.
So not only would they know what weapon it was, but whose weapon it was. And they were going to be put under oath if that case went forward. That's the closest we can get to it.
That's absolutely. I was just going to try and add that, but you got there before me, which is great. And so all of that information is available. It's on the websites if you want to go and read it. You know, we only have a certain amount of evidence, and if you want to stick with the evidence, basically we do not have enough evidence to say who, quote unquote, did 9/11. We don't have that yet.
But we know who to ask.
Yeah, we know who to ask. We know who's closer to knowing who did it than we are. And they
would have been put under oath if this case had gone forward. And this case was dismissed from court with the judges actually stating in the written decision that they were ignoring the law to dismiss the case.
That's right. And
it was not dismissed on merit.
We've talked about this many times. You can go onto the websites and listen to other audios, and you can discover all of that information is there. That in itself is now evidence of what we've done to try and move this forward. So, and also this involves energy. It involves energy, and that's what we talk about.
Suppressed.
Yes,
yep.
and that is in common with the energy technology that's been suppressed, which could change the world, which is the other thing which we want to emphasise. Now, we've got another caller, CJ from Missouri, apparently. So, if you'd like to, I don't know if CJ is still there at all.
Yes, hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Yes, Dr. Wood, I have a question. Is it my understanding that you believe that there were no aircraft involved in 9/11?
I don't deal with beliefs. I deal with evidence. And if you've read my book, you will see that there's only evidence in that book, and my book is irrefutable because it is only evidence. Just like that paragraph that I read at the beginning that I quoted Eric Larson, that if you stick with empirical evidence and sound logic that governs between empirical evidence and your conclusions will be irrefutable. So my conclusions are irrefutable because I've stuck with the evidence. I don't deal with beliefs.
Okay, well, my question, Dr. Wood, is the following. How do you account for 26 of my flight crew colleague co-workers who died on American Airlines Flight 11 and Flight 77?
Well, my book sticks with evidence.
Workers.
Can I sort of step in and say something, please?
I am with an airline.
I understand your situation because I've had other people who have, lost work colleagues speaking to me and calling me a liar because of the things that are on my website, which is fair enough. It's understandable. I understand why they say that. But in relation to the planes and the buildings, we don't know. We know that the planes couldn't have done that to a building. That's the key factor. If you look at the evidence, what happened to those buildings could not have been done by planes. So what happened to the planes is another issue, and that's been looked at elsewhere. And I can direct you to, for example, Richard D. Hall's analysis, which I think is one of the better ones that's available. I've written about it. I did a study of 500 witness accounts from people who were at the World Trade Center site. I don't know much about the other two sites, but the ones at the World Trade Center site offered conflicting accounts in terms of what they saw in relation to planes that were there. So I don't know what happened to the passengers. There is a segment in the Loose Change film which has some possible suggestions. How valid it is, I don't really know, but you can look at the official records and see that things do not add up. So that's about all I can say in this short time we've got. And I have been sent some questions from other listeners which I would like to go on to, but if CJ has got any further comments, if I could take some quick comments or come back or whatever, then I'll try and do that.
Call American Airlines, ask them. They'll give you your names.
I'm not disputing the names. I'm not disputing that there were passengers that got on some of the planes, but according to the information...
We're not talking about passengers. We're talking about pilots and flight attendants.
Indeed,
I work for American Airlines.
Yes, indeed.
My colleagues are dead.
Well, I'm very sorry to hear that, but the information that I've received says that 2 of the planes didn't fly that day, that were scheduled to fly. That's the information that I've seen. So maybe that's wrong. But the point is, it's a horrible tragedy, right? And because of that horrible tragedy, it stops people from analysing the evidence, right? And the evidence shows that what happened to the buildings could not have been caused by planes. That's what the evidence in Dr. Wood's book shows, and she took that evidence to court in 2007 and 2008.
I don't discuss the plane issue in my book beyond, noting that the buildings primarily turn to dust in midair, and airplanes can't do that. Whether real or fake, they can't do that. So
and whether they have passengers on them or not.
Right. I'm concerned with the building and why the building turned to dust in midair.
It sounds harsh for us to say it like that, but that's, if you look at the science and the evidence, that's the conclusion that you forced into from the evidence that's available. Okay, so I'd like to now go on to some of the questions that I had from listeners, which mentioned some of these, 1 or 2 of these issues, unless you've got anything that you'd like to add at this point, Dr. Wood.
No, except the reason why I've done the research I've done is to give answers to family members as to what happened. People are dying to know what happened, not what they believe happened, but what did happen. And I've, dealt with one aspect of it.
I understand that some people who have actually lost relatives and so on, and new people that died, have actually contacted you. I mean, we're not going to go into that, but I understand they have actually contacted you, and
yes,
perhaps you could give us some general...
They've been very respectful of me and very, very thankful to what I've been doing. Because
I think that the ones that have had the strength to actually look at the evidence and and try and understand what actually happened have found your book of enormous benefit to my understanding.
There's one in particular that was a flight attendant who had worked Flight 175 the month before that, and actually saw the crew in the office that morning, but his flight left earlier, and he wrote to me soon after. I've actually got a quote by him in my book. It was with respect to the hurricane that it's talking about.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's one thing people don't know about Hurricane Erin. Yeah, and we've got into a break now, so come back after the break and we'll talk some more. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name's Andrew Johnson, and I'm with Dr. Judy Wood. We're filling in for Ralph Winterrode, who is just having a break this week, and he'll be back next week. And we're talking about 9/11. And we're talking about cold fusion. I've got another clip that I'd like to play shortly. I think the producer is just going to cue that up for us. But maybe while he's doing that, perhaps we can go to Chris in Missouri and talk to Chris in Missouri for a short while.
Hey, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Chris. Hello.
Okay, great. Hi, Mr. Wood. How are you doing?
Hello.
Do you have a question, Chris? Sorry.
Yes. I was just making sure you guys could hear me. It was cutting out. So I understand that, Dr. Wood doesn't like to make assumptions and things. She's focused on the science, and I watched one of her presentations just the other night and heard quite a few of her radio shows. So I know she's really familiar with the science and with the theory. And after all the years of study and hard work based on the evidence she's found, I was wondering, is Israel capable of possessing this kind of technology?
I know of a researcher from Canada, John Hutchison, who experimented with this in the 1980s, and even, I guess, I forget just how far back it goes, and just doing it, in his kitchen. Well, so that lets you know that other people can figure this out too.
Right. I've already. Yeah, I know exactly.
You're capable of it. We're all capable of it.
I understand that. I was just wondering, but on a mass, that's in a kitchen. I was talking about on a scale required to do something like the 9/11. I mean, does Israel possess that capability technologically on that large of a scale?
What does that question do for us? You're capable of doing it. You can start finger point wherever you want to finger point.
I think
I go again, by evidence.
Yeah, I think.
No, I think you're evading the question. I was just asking, based on your technology and research and scientific knowledge, do you know, yes or no, whether Israel has a capability to pull that off on that kind of a scale? That's all. It was just a yes or no question. Period. Simple.
That everybody has that capability. It's a part of nature. It's a natural phenomenon.
I certainly don't know if Israel's got the technology. As we sort of said earlier on, that the best that we know, we in a sense this question was, I suppose, sort of answered earlier on, in that if you go and speak to Science Applications International Corporation and Applied Research Associates, they would probably have a better idea than us who had this technology, and whether a group in Israel might be capable. So I certainly don't know.
As for if somebody's developed it or not, that's a different thing. But whether somebody's capable of developing it is one question. But
so I guess I'd have to. You're right, and I probably have to amend my question a little bit. Do you know if Israel has gained that kind of technology? I guess because since you're more familiar with this,
I've certainly no idea myself.
No idea either. I also look at this as like the Casey Anthony court hearing or court trial. Is she capable of killing her child? Yes. Do you have proof that she killed her child? No.
No, I know. I was just saying that for a long time they were supposedly didn't have the nuclear capability, and it turned out that they had it way longer than people thought, and it was far more advanced. So I was just
right. So what happened on 9/11 is somebody's classified technology. Stuff that's not in the public domain.
I've got some other questions I'd like to get to, Chris. So thank you very much for joining us and asking the question. And hopefully we will get to know who has the technology at some point. That would be good, and then we can sort of hopefully. Somehow encourage them to do things differently in the future, but who knows. So I'd like to go to a couple of questions that have been sent in from people on my email list over the last week or two. And one question came from Ted, who asked if we've been contacted by any prominent member of society who is genuinely enlightened by Dr. Judy's work to the extent that they are prepared to offer public support. And I think, certainly for my part of it, the answer is no. I don't know about what your response to that question would be, Dr. Wood.
Well, there have been some people who have stood up publicly, but not putting their full name to it.
Yeah, so I mean, we've been contacted, or you've been contacted, but not somebody who'd go on try and go on CNN with it or something like that.
Right, because, look what's happened to me.
Right. So I'll try and get through as many of these questions quickly, and I'm going to take this one, because again, it's about the plane strike. And it's the first alleged plane strike, the Norday brothers, who filmed the alleged flight path towards the tower. They seem to be in a perfect position, at a perfect vantage point, and at a perfect time. Is it possible that the Norday brothers were part of the cover-up? Well, I don't know whether they were part of the cover-up, but... there's a very interesting article on Diana Spingola's site by Leslie. I forget. I haven't got the second name here. But if you Google the words Jules Norday and Leslie, you'll get a whole long article about the Norday brothers film and how miraculous it was that they actually got this impact. And the next question is from Mike, and he asks, have the threats to and attempts on your life and those of your staff continued? This is from Mike, who's in the USA. So threats to your life and those of your staff continued. Dr. Wood.
Well, I don't talk about those things because I'm not here, trying to, play for sympathy or
right
or whatnot. It's about the evidence.
Well, one thing I'd like to say there, though, I mean, I'm sort of chuckling not because of about the threats, but our staff. We don't have any staff really. We've got about 5 of us who have been trying to sort of get the information to people and sort of analyse it. And Dr. Wood's written the book. It's she helped to get it printed. Another chap helped to get it printed. I've distributed it in the UK. We don't have any staff. It's just us, frankly. And then I've got
volunteers.
Pretty much. We're going to run out of time soon. I'll try and get to Sharon's question here that Sharon had sent me. I'd like to know the actual status of the site now. People seem to think the rebuilding is finished. She's talking about the World Trade Center site, but I've not seen any evidence. And knowing that the two of you witnessed continued washing down of the site in 2008 makes me dubious about such claims. Why do you think these strange effects continue? Well, I certainly know that there is a water feature in the site of the towers now, which I think was opened. Was it last year or the year before? 2012 was it opened, this water feature? Yeah. And they have 2 waterfalls going down into these squares, which like the footprints of the towers. And also at the Alfred P. Murrah building in Oklahoma City, I believe there is a water feature there as well. I don't know if you've got any comments to add to that, Dr. Wood.
No comments to add to that.
Okay. And then I've got quite a long question here from our friend Peter Taylor Wood, and he says he considers Andrew Johnson to be a close friend, and I think that's true. Thank you, Peter, and frequent correspondence with him. I've been to see Peter a couple of times, or he's came to see me once, and I've been to see him once. And I've had the privilege of meeting Dr. Wood twice, once in Derby and once in Cardiff. Dr. Williams and I have both read your amazing book several times and have been discussing the difficulty in finding questions to ask you it, as you have done such a great job presenting all the evidence. We have both reached the conclusion that possibly even more amazing than the event itself is the way that intelligent people fail to be able to apply very simple logic to such overwhelming empirical evidence. This is very telling in this time, and again we have both read Andrew's book more than once, and it is such a revelation in relation to the propaganda machine. I suppose I have ceased to be astounded by what we are confronted with each day in respect of the internet. What a minefield it has become. And he wanted to talk about scalar waves. Peter was asking a question about scalar waves.
Yeah, his statement is right spot on.
Right.
There's no way if somebody read the book that they would come away not knowing what happened, not understanding it, even any chapter in there.
Right.
The fact that people are asking questions and going around in circles shows just how effective the psychological manipulation of information has been.
Right, and I think I just want to mention about the scalar waves that this goes back to terminology again and giving things a name. And this is a name that seemed to appear in the 1980s, and it doesn't really mean anything when you look into it. So I think it's sort of a distraction, but again, it's also
just like HARP.
Yeah, to some extent, but people are obviously trying to work out what the technology is and how it works. But that we won't, we're not in a position to get to that very well at the moment because we still haven't got enough information. We've only got certain bits and pieces.
Well, in my book, I actually have a section about all these, I call them trendy terms.
Yes.
When people name drop trendy terms, they think that it makes it sound like they know what they're talking about. But it does the opposite because the terms are ill-defined. And whatever technology was used to destroy the towers is, turn them to dust, is classified technology. It's not in the public domain.
We've run out of time. Is that science, philosophy, economics and sociology are also cluttered with spin doctorism and or residues of them. It is necessary to dig a little deeper in order to achieve a more firm grasp of the meanings of the above considerations. It can be observed, at least hypothetically, that the average human being cannot function very well unless a few realities are established, and which thereafter arouse some semblance of certainty. Otherwise, the human sort of flops about in a sinkhole of uncertainty, and groups of humans flopping about in this way are known to be detrimental with regard to any number of situations. Indeed, information needs to be managed in order to avoid extensive demonstrations of such flopping around. This natural and perpetual need automatically calls forth the profession of spin doctorism. If human specimens were not information processing entities each in their own right, then the age-old profession of spin doctoring would not be needed. As it is, though, human specimens are information processing entities. That is so results in a variety of problems that sometimes stress the creative energies of spin doctors in no small way. But regarding this, there are sometimes two blessings that ease the job of proficient spin doctors. The first blessing is that a fair share of humans don't really require copious amounts of information as they proceed from the womb of birth to the maw of death. The second blessing is that a fair share of humans will accept illusory information, since it does take rather copious amounts of information to distinguish illusory from other kinds of information. Spin doctors since antiquity have apparently been keenly aware of these two blessings. It has long been understood that illusory information can serve quite excellent purposes, since in large part there is no professed desire among the human point that it doesn't matter. The above sentence probably sounds like a babble of words, but the babble might become more understandable if the concept of information management is forced into it. Information management has to do with establishing whatever is to be conceptualized as constituting reality within any given societal framework or within any social grouping. This is to say that reality making and information management are somehow interrelated, largely because the reality cannot be constructed unless information relevant to it is managed in this or that way. The process of constructing a reality requires three activities, all of which require information management talents. 1. Facts, evidence and information that might support the reality, thereby proving it real, need to be emphasized and, best of all, taught as the truth. 2. Facts, evidence and information that would tend to deconstruct the reality need to be disposed of somehow. 3. The willful introduction of useful illusions if and when 1 and 2 above cannot be made to seem consistent or to be creatively managed. Anyone who can become expert in dealing with the three factors above will find his or her talents as a spin doctor much in demand. The term spin doctor is of rather recent vintage, of course, but the craft it represents is quite an old and traditional one. The factors briefly outlined above seem straightforward enough, especially in that the activities of spin doctors are sometimes mentioned in mainstream media. Indeed, what does a spin doctor do if not to manage information along the lines of the three factors outlined? Spin doctorism is usually mentioned only in relationship to political intrigues, most specifically those emerging or ongoing at the highest echelons in Washington, D.C. But the extended fact of the matter and masses for other kinds of information. To this must be added one other significant factor that not only eases the job of spin doctors, but elevates it to a kind of power threshold. In that each human is an information processing entity, each is also an information processing mechanism. The latter here is not mentioned in order to diminish in any way the former. The point is that information is composed of very numerous data bytes, the whole of which need to be organized into some kind of information whole, so one fact in itself tends to have little meaning unless it is compared to and combined with lots of other facts. In this sense, then, one fact, or even 10 of them, only adds up to a very tiny information universe. Beyond this, it is quite well understood that the human species, universally and generically, shares in mental equipment which processes information in what amounts to mechanistic ways. Perhaps this can better be understood by picturing the generic mental equipment as the computer hardware, and then picturing the information, real, artificial or illusory, entered into it as mental software programs. This is to say, as those computer efficient realise that information that conflicts is mechanically rejected, while information that agrees is mechanically accepted. All the complexities of human mental apparatus considered, this analogy may be a weak one, to be sure, but this situation is, of course, an additional blessing for information spinning experts, or at least for proficient ones. All that really needs to be done in order to maintain spin control of mental software program is 1. On the one hand, to enter and maintain certain data or information factoids considered desirable, and 2. On the other hand, to delete and maintain as deleted certain other data information factoids considered undesirable. Lastly, all human entities seem to possess what... Well, good evening everyone, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. My name is Andrew Johnson, and I'm filling in for Ralph Winterowd just for this week. Ralph will be back next week, and in a few minutes' time I shall be bringing on my guest, or indeed maybe I'm her guest, and that will be Dr. Judy Wood. And we've got a few things to talk about tonight, and we're going to try and get some questions at the end that have been sent to us. And I'd like to thank Ralph for giving us this opportunity to fill in for him. And today's it's the 2nd of February 2014 when we're recording this and broadcasting this. So what I want to really start off with is a piece of text that I came across earlier this week, which fits in very well with something that's been happening in the last couple of weeks, which we're going to go into some detail to talk about. It'll probably take us quite a bit of time to explain it, and it's to do with 9/11, and it's also to do with the connection between 9/11 and energy. That's what we're going to be talking about a little bit later. But really, to lead into that, I wanted to read this text, and I've actually only changed 2 words in this, because it wasn't originally about what the word that I've changed, but I'm going to read it now, which will take us probably into the first ad break. The major purpose of this section is not to present evidence of anything, but to show that evidence does not seem to matter. The answer to why it doesn't matter is embedded in an ongoing, rather deep and tangled confusion, and it will take mental equipment far more stalwart than mine to penetrate it. A considerable volume of very strange evidence exists about 9/11. That is, simply not challengeable, even if it is strange. But since evidence doesn't matter, we need not examine the entirety of the volume to make that might be referred to as an information comfort zone. Furthermore, most humans seem to like this zone, and they don't particularly want information discomfort to be induced or intruded into it. Thus, old and familiar information associated with information comfort is desirable over new, unfamiliar and alien information that induces discomfort. Thus it is easy enough to see why information might entirely wreck information comfort zones is viewed with ultimate distaste. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. My name's Andrew Johnson, and we're filling in for Ralph Winterowd, and we'll just be here for this week, and Ralph will be back next week. We're going to take callers in the next hour, and the number to call will be 1-800-313-9443. Now, the text that I just read, quite long, has some quite complicated constructs within it, but that's actually from a book by a chap called Ingo Swann, and he didn't write the book about 9/11, he wrote it about something else, but the book is called Penetration, and you can go and check that out, and that came from chapter 12. That was the first part of chapter 12, and essentially what I was using it to illustrate was this idea of how you can manage people's perceptions, how you can manage the information that they're exposed to, and therefore by doing that you can construct the reality that they experience and the reality that they live in. And so I'd like now to bring on Dr. Judy Wood, if she's still there.
Yes, hello, I'm here.
Hi. And so we've been talking quite a bit about really what perception management and what it was called there was spin doctorism, and particularly as it's been applied to how your research has actually been perception managed, probably more than certainly anything else I've encountered. If you got any comments on